Tonight, with just days to go before the holiday, America is on the move, despite pleas from health officials to stay at home. Airports packed with Thanksgiving travelers, plus nearly 84,000 Americans in the hospital tonight sick with COVID. The entire state of Pennsylvania may run out of ICU beds within the week. And look at these lines at food banks as America faces its worst food insecurity crisis since the Great Depression. COVID crowds from this jam-packed bar in Florida to a crowded church service in Oklahoma. Health officials worried about COVID fatigue. Reversing course. Breaking news tonight. The Trump administration official in charge of the presidential transition says she's giving President-elect Biden access to government resources and funding after Michigan officially certifies he won. Will President Trump now concede? Plus, Mr. Biden makes historic cabinet picks. The first Latino to head Homeland Security, the first woman to head U.S. intelligence. Racing to a cure. Breaking news as a third COVID vaccine reports strong results. Could the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine help stop transmission? Plus, tonight, we take you to the front lines, inside a hospital that will be one of the first to have a vaccine. A major recall involving nearly 6 million SUVs and trucks. We'll have the latest details for you and your family. And a texting mix-up brought him into their family. Tonight, why their Thanksgiving ritual became even more meaningful this year. Tonight, with just days to go.
I'm at the request of the Trump campaign. It's scheduled to begin this Wednesday at 9 a.m. On Saturday, the president's legal team filed a petition asking for the recount just one day after the state certified its election results. A hand recount of the state's 5 million ballots concluded with President-elect Joe Biden leading by more than 12,000 votes. State law allows candidates to request a recount if the margin is half a percentage point or less. Today, the state election board approved 2 emergency election rules to make absentee voting easier during the upcoming January 5th runoffs. The pair of Senate contests will determine which party controls the chamber when Mr. Biden takes office. Greg Bluestein is a political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and joins me now. Hey there, Greg. So what can you tell us about Secretary of State Raffensperger's announcement about the recount status?
Yeah, well, the recount's expected to end next Wednesday. There's a tight deadline, and these are exhausted county elections officials who have just gone through another hand recount, just ended a few days ago, of all 5 million or so ballots cast in the presidential race. Now they're doing it yet again. And then remember, we've got, not only do we have a January 5th Senate runoffs, but we also have some other local races on December 1st. So a lot of work for these county elections officials that are already under immense pressure.
Well, how many people have requested absentee ballots for Georgia's runoff elections compared to the election which just passed?
Yeah, it's a staggering amount. It's more than 760,000 people have already requested absentee ballot forms. That's more than 3 times as many as people have voted in 2018 during our general election. That's, of course, because of the pandemic. And it's also because of changing voter habits. You know, during the June primary in Georgia, we had a record number of Democratic voters cast ballots, and many of them by mail. And so it's an accepted practice now. And Republicans are now more aggressively pushing absentee ballots as well.
Well, originally, the Elections Board was considering a third rule that aimed to prevent people from out of state from voting in Georgia's runoffs. How big of a concern is that, and why didn't the board follow through with that proposal?
Yeah, this has been a concern since Andrew Yang, the former presidential candidate, tweeted a few weeks ago that he was moving to Georgia and encouraging members of his Yang gang to follow him. He's since clarified that, saying he's moving to Georgia but doesn't plan to register to vote. But yet, Republicans kind of seized on that and said that there's going to be a tremendous number of outsiders moving in just to vote and then moving back to wherever they lived previously. We've got no evidence of that whatsoever. And in fact, party leaders are pushing people, supporters from outside the state, to stay where they are and to send resources, volunteer in other ways, not by moving here. But this provision would have essentially directed county officials to look for other evidence, such as vehicle registration, factor that in when they're looking at new registrants between the November election and the December 7th deadline to register to vote. But in the end, state officials said, look, that's already a law on the books. They didn't need to. They felt that it was redundant to add another rule.
Interesting. Well, President Trump criticized Georgia's manual recount because it did not verify voters' signatures. Some Republicans, including Governor Brian Kemp, have called for a signature audit. Now, today, elections officials shot down that idea. Which ballots could the Trump campaign would the Trump campaign like to see disqualified? And why are elections officials unlikely to do that? Yeah, I mean, without evidence, the president has called Georgia's vote riddled with fraud. And again, there's been no evidence whatsoever, and Republican election officials have said that. But what he wants is something that's impossible. He wants a signature verification that ties back the signatures to the ballots that were cast. And that is enshrined in Georgia law of secret ballots. So once elections officials tally those ballots, they're separated. There's no way to kind of cross-check them. What some other Republicans have called for is basically a signature verification of the ballots that the envelopes that those absentee ballots came in on match back to voter registration. That is feasible, but tremendously difficult. And state election officials said today, there's no reason to do it. There's no evidence to support such an exhaustive review. Well, in an interview with Newsmax on Saturday, a lawyer associated with President Trump, Sidney Powell, made a number of unfounded claims, including the accusation that Republican Congressman Doug Collins likely lost the special election to Kelly Loeffler in a rigged contest. Now, the Trump campaign is distancing itself from Powell. But, Greg, how might these attacks on Georgia's voting system end up hurting Republicans? Yeah, this is the fear that Republicans have had really since November 3rd, since it became clear that at least one of these races was certainly going into the runoff, is that President Trump's baseless accusations about voter fraud would end up depressing the Republican base here that both Senator David Perdue and Senator Kelly Loeffler rely upon in order to win these two Senate seats on January 5th. So what they're fearful of is that all these accusations, all these tweets, all the social media stuff about a preordained result, a rigged election, will be the equivalent of a wet blanket thrown over GOP turnout. And so they're pushing aggressively back, trying to energize their base without antagonizing President Trump. Yeah, well, in the meantime, incoming White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain says that President-elect Joe Biden will likely visit Georgia to campaign on behalf of Democrats Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. Will President Trump do the same for Senators Perdue and Loeffler? I would think so. I mean, I think this is an all-hands-on-deck situation here in Georgia. We've already seen about almost a half dozen or so high-profile Republican officials, including Vice President Pence, come down. Georgia's really become Iowa. It's become a staging ground for 2024 potential candidates, and President Trump is one of them. So I expect him to come down here. What the candidates are worried about is if he focuses more on his own election rather than their election. But I think they take whatever they can get. On the Democratic side, I think we'll see Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. I think we'll see former President Obama. And I think we'll see, as you just mentioned, President-elect Joe Biden. Yeah, but as you noted, Greg, that messaging could be tricky. On the one hand, if the president does decide to go and calls into question once more the process of the voting system itself in Georgia, as you said, you can see how some of those Republicans might be concerned that could depress turnout. We will continue to watch it. Greg Bluestein, Greg, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Is seeing its largest protests in decades, with widespread anger at a decision to almost totally ban abortions. The country already has some of the strictest abortion laws in Europe. The protests have delayed the law's implementation, but hospitals across Poland have already stopped performing the procedure. Jean McKenzie from our media partners at the BBC is in Warsaw with the latest.
Weeks of rage pouring through the streets of Warsaw. Women fighting to protect what little right to abortion they have against a government that's trying to take it away.
It's a protest of young people. They love to sing, they love to dance.
But authorities have had enough now. Police are brought in from across the country to break this up.
There are just such a surprising number of police here this evening, and it just feels so disproportionate to the number of protesters.
Yeah, it was difficult because we've been blocked several times and split in different groups. But finally, we managed to group everybody here.
The protests erupted after Poland's top court announced a ban on abortions where the fetus is severely malformed, virtually the only terminations allowed here. Shocked by the backlash, the government hasn't enforced the ruling yet, leaving women in limbo. But Dr. Pazynska is one of the few doctors still performing terminations. Many hospitals have already stopped for fear of breaking the law.
Are you afraid?
Actually, I am not. I don't know why, but yeah, I am not afraid. I mean, I feel deeply inside that I am doing right thing. So I hope the karma will save me, and I won't go to jail.
She introduces us to her patient who was admitted in the morning.
Hi, how are you?
21 weeks pregnant, her fetus is missing vital organs and won't survive. But she's been refused a termination 3 times.
Boję się tego, co dzisiaj się wydarzy. Od jutra, jeśli wyjdę ze szpitala, będzie lepiej. Kiedy nie będę musiała już biegać od lekarza do lekarza i prosić się o pomoc i tylko słuchać odmów.
Poland is strongly Catholic, and the Conservative government often portrays abortion as an attack on the country's faith. But even so, this new ban has very little support.
Have you picked the wrong fight?
No, definitely not. This is a good fight because we want human life to be protected, and so we are very open about this. I am sorry if anyone is offended by it, but actually we will not be apologizing for it.
Back at the march, the mood suddenly changes. Police close in. A pensioner is dragged from the streets. Others are beaten and pepper sprayed. Clementina is one of them.
Why are the authorities reacting so strongly to your protests?
Because they are scared. They feel they are losing the power.
Are you going to win this fight?
We are winning. It doesn't look like, but we are.
The ban could be implemented any day, but protesters know this is a bigger battle over which direction the country takes. Jean Mackenzie, BBC News, Warsaw.
We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the rest of the day's news. You're streaming CBSN. CBS News, always on. Is seeing its largest protests in decades with widespread anger and a decision to almost totally ban abortions.